Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Before we get started, I want to invite you to come to Unwind, a free drop-in practice session that I'm leading each week on Zoom. It lasts about 30 minutes and just long enough, hopefully, to fit between all your other tasks and to-dos. Each week, I give a brief science-backed tip to help with stress management or well-being enhancement. Then we spend about 15 minutes in a guided relaxation, meditation, or contemplation practice. Lastly, we end with a few minutes for discussion and personal connection. I encourage people to make the session work for themselves, so if you prefer to call in or keep your camera off, that is just fine. You can get more details and sign up to get the Zoom link and call-in information at drkateking.com/unwind. Hope to see you there. Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well out there in the world. This week, Alex and I thought we'd have another conversation. We got such good feedback about our recent conversation sharing about the path of meditation. If you haven't had the chance to listen to that yet, you could go back and listen to us share a little bit about our own journeys. And today we thought we would talk about another one of our favorite themes and a recurring theme in this podcast, if you've been listening for any time, which is self-compassion. This is something that's been really important for both Alex and I, and has been part of the work of many, many, many of our guests because it's something that we've seen as so important. So we're going to share a little bit about self-compassion, what it means to us, and our own kind of journeys with it. And hopefully you'll find something useful as you think about ways in which you can bring self-compassion into your own life as well. So why don't we get started with a question? What does self-compassion mean to us? What does it even mean? Alex, tell us, what does self-compassion mean?
So if we start with the Dalai Lama's definition and tweak it, we could say it's sensitivity to one's own pain and the desire to alleviate it. After having been heavily into mindful self-compassion for about a year, my own definition seems to be tending towards kindness and care and goodwill toward myself. That's what it's evolving towards.
Yeah, I like that. And for me too, very, very similar. And it sounds so simple, yet it's so hard at times to actually implement. But right, starting with that definition, like you mentioned with the Dalai Lama, that compassion is being aware of suffering and then doing something or wanting to do something to help. And then having that feeling towards myself. And that means for me, paying attention to how I'm feeling. So just being tuned in enough to myself to know when I'm struggling or having distress or suffering. And then responding to that when that does happen with care and kindness, as you're saying, right? I like the definition of self-compassion. That's basically treating yourself like you would a good friend, right? Or being a good companion to yourself. So I think a lot of us know how to be a good friend or how to be a caring companion. And to think about treating ourselves that way feels maybe it feels a little less abstract thinking of it that way. Like, oh, right, I know how to be a good friend to other people, or I know what it feels like when someone's a good friend to me. Let me try to cultivate that for myself. Somehow that makes it feel a little bit more kind of accessible and less sort of just a bunch of abstract theoretical words.
Oh, I can see how the mindful self-compassion definition, as developed by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, makes it much more 3D because it adds to kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. So then we have a perspective, brings a much larger perspective, and also the practicality of the mindfulness piece. But once those things are ticking along, then to me, it starts to feel like kindness and care. But those things probably make it possible for the vehicle to go in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, right. Sometimes I have described it to other people as building a reflex of care. Right. So it's like, oh, I'm hurting. I deserve care. Oh, you're hurting. You deserve care, right? That is something that you can cultivate instead of I'm hurting. Let me ignore that. I'm hurting. That's inconvenient because I have a lot to do. Or I'm hurting and I shouldn't. Or, there's all these other ways that we tend to respond to our own suffering besides with care. So if we can start to build that reflex, right? Oh, I'm in pain. Oh, what does that mean? Care. No, that doesn't mean ignore it. No, that doesn't mean tell myself to suck it up. No, that doesn't mean whatever, berate myself about it. It actually means, oh, be nice, offer kindness. And sometimes that means kind words in my head. Sometimes that means something that I do in the world, but just sort of building that reflex of like noticing and then responding with, like, as you're saying, basic kindness. Like it's not a complicated idea. It's just that it's not something we've been taught to do very much.
Or perhaps it is complicated. It can be simple to, the word may be simple.
But the word sounds simple, right? Kindness, care, those sound like sweet things people learn in kindergarten or something. They seem simple.
Elemental.
I see, right. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot to them. And as you're pointing out, in practice, it's about growing mental habits. So it's not, the book definition may be misleading a little bit. Like, what color is it? It's like, it's white. That's not really it. It's because it's really about more than kindness. It's about developing, growing mental habits of relating to oneself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because there's many great guided self-compassion practices in the world, and do them as often as you can. But, if you've got other things to do in your life besides do guided practices all day, one needs to start to implement those tools and those skills in between the guided practice sessions. I mean, it's sort of like the thing people say about practice is that it's practice for life, right? Like people say that about yoga practice or meditation practice, is that you're doing something during your practice that you want to cultivate at other times as well.
Because otherwise it can sound like you either have it or you don't.
Right.
You fail to do it. It's really about developing, growing these mental habits.
Yeah, I think is it in the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion that they talk about it as an inner resource that you're building, which I think is a nice description. As we're thinking about building this over time, to think about what our self-compassion journeys have looked like, where we started, where we are now.
I've internalized cold, harsh treatment from environments I developed in. So I discovered self-compassion when I attended a talk by Chris Germer. And then after taking courses and practicing a lot, I feel like it has brought about a lot of internal change, although I think I still have a way to go.
I think the pandemic has been a long self-compassion retreat for you.
This has been a silver lining of the pandemic.
Lots of good free guided practices that the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion are offering. So we can share that resource in the show notes for people.
Yes, that has been invaluable. And we also learn by modeling and by receiving from other people. So it's not just something you can, and presumably you could open a book and practice and you'll be self-compassionate. But us being human beings, it's much yummier and richer to receive it from other people, to see it modeled by other people, like a socialization process almost. Yeah.
Right. Being part of a community of people who value that and who are aspiring to be more compassionate and self-compassionate, and seeing how that shows up in the interpersonal kind of interactions.
Yeah, so seeing how people have naturalized this concept and how they live it, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, my self-compassion journey started, I mean, hearing this phrase self-compassion and sort of understanding it kind of conceptually, I think, started with reading Kristin Neff's book called Self-Compassion, Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And the book, she shares a lot of stories from her own experience, which I think was helpful as well in that text. So that was my sort of first introduction to sort of the concept. I don't remember how I heard of her book. Somebody recommended it to me. I don't remember how or who, but that's where I started with trying to understand that. I think in a bigger picture, if I think about how have I over time become kinder to myself, I think that journey started before I understood or had heard the concept of self-compassion. I think, if I look back or earlier in my life, to times when I realized like, maybe I'm doing too much for other people and not doing enough for myself. Maybe I need to prioritize my own well-being. Maybe I need to do some personal growth. If I think of that was, many years ago that I started to sort of pay attention to that theme and start to tend to my own well-being and do things that now would be called self-compassionate, like setting better boundaries with other people, taking time to do self-caring practices, to monitor my level of burnout and take breaks when I need to, and all these kinds of things. And even developing through therapy and other resources and a lot of self-help, just developing a kinder relationship with myself, or like a kinder inner voice, or a softer, gentler kind of self-talk. So that, I think, predates the concept of self-compassion entering my life, but is important because I think it also made it, when I encountered the idea, it made me take to it a little bit, maybe more easily or something, because I'd already done a fair amount of kind of personal growth work at that point. So it felt more accessible and workable, or like familiar in some way to other things I had already been kind of trying to cultivate. I also think it has helped me a lot in working with compassion in general, sort of understanding kind of the energy of compassion in my life, for myself, for other people, for all beings. Some of the compassion practices from Buddhism, like Tonglen or various metta or loving kindness practices, earlier in my life, when I sort of first encountered them, like in college or whatever, they didn't really resonate with me, or I didn't get a lot out of them. It was like, it didn't work or something. But doing the work to build the gateway in through self-compassion, I think, has made those practices feel more accessible and doable.
It's interesting. I remember taking a weekend workshop with Sharon Salzberg on loving kindness, and discovering loving kindness really worked for me as a meditation practice. But somehow, perhaps some cognitive underpinnings were missing. It's just, I didn't realize at that point how transformative a practice that can be.
I mean, I think maybe the pathway into some of those practices for some of us does need to be through the self-compassion door, rather than like through compassion for others. And maybe for other people it would be different. I don't know. Like sort of related to those practices in a kind of generic, abstract sort of way, but I don't think I had the warmth as much in it as I do now, having kind of honed that self-compassion instrument.
Well, now the scientific data now shows how compellingly helpful these practices are. In the absence of that, out of all the tasks that one needs to accomplish in life, being kinder doesn't seem like near the top. But actually it is, as it turns out. Yeah.
I see. Interesting.
That's what I've discovered.
So what you're saying is that knowing that there's scientific kind of backing for the positive impact of these kinds of practices is motivating and inspiring.
Very much so. Chris Germer quotes Barbara Fredrickson, her review of people who had done loving kindness meditation practice, the positive emotions, personal resources that get grown, like problem-solving ability, environmental mastery, self-acceptance, purpose. Like, they're just mind-blowing changes that it brings about. Social support, yeah.
I love that. And I also that just doesn't do it like that for whatever reason. Like that doesn't inspire me to practice.
Interesting.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't not, it's like, but it doesn't have the same impact, I guess, on me as it sounds like it does on you. Like it sounds like you're saying that knowing that the data shows that it is good for you in various ways makes you want to do it more. And I guess for me, yes. I want to do it more because it feels good. Or something like that. I mean, not that I have a problem with data at all. I think it's great, and it does guide us towards, how we prioritize all the many things we could be doing with our days. So that makes total sense. But I just noticed that for me, that I don't necessarily have that same sentiment around this kind of practice.
Right.
So how has self-compassion helped us, sort of practically speaking, in our lives?
For me, the self-soothing aspect of self-compassion has been transformative. And that actually makes mindfulness possible for me, which means it makes acceptance of reality possible. And another big thing has been getting on my own side, developing empathy, sympathy, compassion for myself, because that was a piece that was becoming my own champion, advocate. That was a big missing piece.
I think it's interesting that you're saying that self-compassion through the channel of self-soothing has made it easier for you to be more mindful in general.
Completely.
Mm-hmm. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
I'm sort of trying to connect the dots and map my own experience onto that. Like I was saying before, that being mindful helps me be aware of when I'm experiencing distress. And then the self-compassion feels like a healthier way of relating to that distress. Sort of like I'm paying attention, I'm scanning my own experience. When I notice a little sonar of distress, then there's care and kindness that can go to it and tend to that. And that has been very helpful for me in many ways. I'm thinking like just being able to have hard conversations or do brave things, knowing that I'm not going to beat myself up about it, or that it doesn't have to be painful for me, makes it easier. I feel like it's easier to tolerate challenging experiences because there's a inner voice that's like a good friend who's saying like, hey, you got this, or like, hey, whatever happens, I'm on your side.
It's like an insurance policy, or like having a floor through which you can't fall.
Right.
Like you'll be the minimum. It's like a safety net, like an emotional safety net.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Kristin Neff was talking about how the near enemies of self-compassion are hostility and complacency, and I can totally see how that has evolved for me. Like instead of hostility towards myself or towards others, I can own my feelings and connect them to my needs, and it also avoids self-complacency, because if you can look at painful things, then actually you wouldn't want yourself to be complacent and stay in a half comfortable but bad place. You would end up wanting the best for yourself. It sounds strange saying it, but
and wanting yourself not to suffer, right? You become aware of suffering, and then you have the willingness to help, right? So to help means to do something, right? So it's activating.
Very, very much so. That's very curious. That it leads almost directly to recognition of one's own needs and feelings and internal experiencing. These things are it's odd because all these things seem so connected.
It's like a mind map that you're trying to sort of overlay on reality, and reality sort of defies all the concepts in some way. You can't quite map it all out verbally, I think. Other ways self-compassion has helped us in our lives.
Another thing that has happened is I can recognize when I'm suffering, when I'm experiencing pain. That's totally new. And it has opened up a lot more access to sensory memories, interestingly. It almost feels like processing is happening. All of a sudden, like, it's almost like looking through like leafing through a book and connecting in a nonviolent communication, NVC way, needs and feelings. and seeing the value of unpleasant experiences and feelings. Like, oh, that's pointing me to the fact that this need is not met. How can I meet that need? Revolutionary.
And how did self-compassion help with that?
Unpleasant experience arises.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware it's painful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to soothe myself and be with that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one might say befriending the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to understand what's going on. Like, well, why am I feeling this way? Because I have that need.
So
like
the
other people.
compassion allows you to be curious about your experience because you can kind of hold it with that tenderness and care and be with it. And so then you can be curious about it. And then from the curiosity, then you can start to think about what's driving it, what's underneath it, what are the needs, etc.
Yes.
Got it.
And makes it possible and easier to validate myself.
Mm-hmm.
Makes the world a safer place also, because like unpleasant experiences are things I can learn from. They're not threats.
Yeah. I think something that self-compassion is helping with is this tendency to sort of kind of tighten when things get difficult, or even just noticing, like if I'm meditating and then I realize like I've just spent 10 minutes like planning how to write an email to someone or something. And I'm like, oh, I feel like frustrated by that. There's a sort of frustration. And so that's,
physically
I feel
as well.
Yeah, right. And I feel like a sort of clenching or tightening, And so I think that those are spots that I notice in my sort of lived experience these days when I notice the sort of reflex of tension or reflex of kind of a mild irritation, with something, that's a place where the self-compassion is. That's like the growing edge of where the self-compassion is sort of becoming more useful for myself these days.
Beautiful.
How does self-compassion and other compassion, that is compassion for other people, connect?
Self-compassion leads to understanding myself better. And then when I understand myself better, I understand others better. And I'm more forgiving of all of us. The mind state seems sort of non-directional. It is sort of like the sun in all directions.
So there's a sense of compassion kind of radiating, and then it lands on the self, it lands on others. It's sort of a beacon or like you said, like sunlight.
Yeah. It's a little bit like to the person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So to the person with compassion,
everything needs compassion.
Everyone looks deserving. Everyone is deserving of compassion.
That's good. It feels like a good hammer to carry around. Well, self and other compassion for me this is very interesting for me in my own experience, as well as what I see in other people when I'm trying to help them with compassion, because I think many people find it very easy to want to help other people and to express compassion for other people. So there's a lot of like overgiving to others. And so really being oriented around taking care of others as a helper myself and spending a lot of my time around other helping professionals, that sometimes what comes easier, or often, at least in the circles where I tend to roll, is taking care of other people tends to come easier. And often taking care of other people is what's been socialized into us, I think, especially for women, but not only.
Absolutely.
And so we've had a lot of training about how to watch other people, notice how they respond, make sure everyone else is comfortable, that kind of thing. So in a way, many people, I think, are good at being compassionate to others, and they can then use that skill and realize they have that skill, but they're just not giving it to themselves. And then they can use that as a touchstone to say like, oh, right, I do that for everyone else. Let me try to do that for me, even though it's really uncomfortable. That said, I do think that when we're helping other people from a place of obligation or from a fearful or insecure place of like, I have to make everybody else happy or else I'm a bad person, or, that kind of thing. Or if the stakes are like, I can't not help you because I feel bad if I don't, or there's something like, I don't think that it's as simple as like, oh, we're all taking such good care of everyone else and we just need to care for ourselves. I think sometimes that care that we're giving to other people that it's actually like it's missing something that then when you're able to be compassionate for yourself, that care that you give feels like it's coming from a deeper source or something.
No, it does. I mean, it's also my experience that when I got started with self-compassion, I think my compassion for other beings was more developed than compassion for myself. So I think that's a very good way to widen the window or something.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to sort of like draw out the path, it's like, first I took care of everyone else but me, right? Then I learned how to be self-compassionate and caring for myself. And now it's so much easier to offer care to other people, almost in this way that I feel like I wasn't back then. It feels so different now when it's coming from a place of actual self-compassion. It just feels like a very different experience on the other side of cultivating that, to the extent I have. There's certainly more to do, but it does feel different now having done that work. And I look back at the compassion for others I used to engage in and think like, it just feels so much more sustainable now and so much better now.
Does it feel more relaxed and with less sense of urgency?
Yeah. It feels more relaxed. Yeah, because it's not about fulfilling my needs by taking care of you. Because when you're socialized to take care of other people, then like the trick is like you have to do it. So then it's actually about you.
Right. Yeah. So I think one thing that was the dynamic for me was I tried to keep suffering out of my awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So when I noticed awareness, it was almost like, oh, there's like a leak in the dam. Like I have to put my finger in it right away. And when you realize how much suffering there really is, it's like, oh, okay, well, hold on. I can't plug all the holes at once. Like let's have a think here and become comfortable with discomfort. Also, comfortable with the fact that there is suffering. Yep, we're all suffering.
Right. So your pain makes me uncomfortable. So I need to stop your pain so I feel better. Like that is not the case now. With self-compassion on board, it's more like, oh, you're in pain. How can I help? We all experience pain. I feel your pain with you. That's not so scary to me. It just is a different experience, very, very different experience.
So certain words that people describe the path ahead, like spaciousness, that makes sense. That applies. Yeah, it becomes more spacious because you don't have to plug every hole you notice. Right away.
Right. Yeah. Right. So self-compassion makes me/people, I think, a lot of people, better able to be around suffering, more comfortable around suffering.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's not necessarily a advertised feature, but that is certainly something I've noticed.
Right. So it's not a limited quantity. Like there's the amount of tin in the world is limited. But it's
right.
But it's not like that. It's not like a commodity that runs out.
Right.
It's a very different model is required to explain how it works. Right. In fact, if anything, exchanging it increases the amount.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Practicing it increases the amount. That's
Yeah. It's not a finite resource. It's not either me or you. It's like, how about both of us? How about everyone? Right? There's plenty to go around. Oh, I can just make more, which is pretty profound, I think, for a lot of us who maybe have felt like there's not enough kindness to go around.
Yeah, there's some really curious qualities about it. I mean, in that it seems like it's built in for mammals at least, but then it does seem to require another to light the fire. Perhaps it's not, even though the seeds are there.
I think maybe it's there, but that it gets covered over or snuffed out earlier in our lives. And then we have to kind of re-spark it. But it's easy. It's not like you're learning something new. It's like something dormant that actually comes quite naturally once you start to do it.
Yes, there's definitely that feeling to it.
Yeah.
And also something universal. It's not an individual quality. It seems much larger than the individual. Like everyone seems to have it.
Right, because it's connected to just that basic meeting my own needs, which, as you're saying, animals do that, right? It's just, I got needs. How am I going to pay attention to those and be kind enough to myself to make a life where I get my needs met? And I treat them with respect and give myself care when I'm struggling. What a nice thought.
Which may bring us to the question about things that we wish other people knew. I mean, really good things to know would be that self-compassion makes mindfulness possible for some of us. I think that's a profound insight.
Can you expand on that just a little?
So being able to soothe oneself, for some people anyway, and I think studies bear this out, that self-compassion boosts mindfulness. So being able to stay with distressing experience then opens the door to further mindfulness.
Makes you better able to stay with your experience because if there's distress, you can be with it. You don't have to leave the building mentally or emotionally.
Yeah, and also you can bring down the fight, flight, freeze. So you become a better instrument, like a measurement instrument, because you can tolerate, let's say, cold water. And you can dip the thermometer into ice cold water and it'll still measure it. Your tolerance becomes much wider. And another one would be that how well self-compassion combines with nonviolent communication as developed by Marshall Rosenberg. It just almost seems like the secret second volume or something.
You're right. I mean, a common self-compassion question is, what do I need? And needs are like really core in nonviolent communication. So it makes sense that like one would lead into the other, or that they'd fit with each other quite nicely.
Right. And the distinction they make between needs and strategies. Like, I don't need a cushion. I need comfort as a human being. Everyone needs respect and affection, but they don't need to be president. Or another point that's really that I wish a lot of people knew is the role of practice in changing mental habits, so that long-held views and habits can be changed, but it takes practice and reflection. So not just hearing it once is not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think that not just with self-compassion, but so many guided meditation practices or mindfulness practices, or, I'm thinking like gratitude practices or other similar practices that are meant to cultivate some state of mind or certain quality. It's disappointing sometimes when people sort of try one guided practice and turn it off halfway through, or say like, well, that didn't work for me, or I'm not better yet, or like that didn't do it, not realizing that it can be quite a journey, quite a long haul, for these things to really be transformational.
Requires repeated application in different situations of this knowledge and skills. So they talk about being dose dependent. If you practice a little bit, you'll heal a little bit. If you practice more, you'll heal more.
I wish people knew that self-compassion isn't just touchy-feely. That self-compassion makes you brave and active in the world, helps you do things and get things done. Very pragmatic and helpful in that way. It's not just, you don't have to even do a lot of formal practice. If you don't love to do guided practices, you can still cultivate self-compassion with how you engage with your self-talk on a day-to-day, everyday, moment-to-moment kind of experience. The guided practices are there to expand and support and all of that. But if that's not your thing, you can still learn to use self-compassion and be more self-compassionate in your everyday life. And again, it really can have a profound impact on a lot of very practical and pragmatic things. So not going down the whole long road of like, and what's so bad about being touchy-feely? Like, why is that bad? We could, would be a worthy question if there's a listener out there who's saying, they don't like it because it's touchy-feely, I would want to ask that question about, how and why have you decided touchy-feely is bad? But also, it doesn't have to be touchy-feely. You can do it in a way that works for your own sensibilities. And you might want some help and support, find somebody who, is a self-compassion teacher or something to help you figure out how to apply it in your own life. But there's lots of different ways to apply it. And I think some of the books on self-compassion also give good practical examples of how people use it in their lives, which I think can be helpful for people to see as well. And also, I think self-compassion can really connect to really any spiritual path. Sort of love and compassion are sort of at the heart of many world religions, so it would easily dovetail and connect to things that you learn and do in your spiritual life, and that it can, even though it's sort of taught as a kind of secular thing, often by psychologists interested in Buddhism and things like that, it is actually non-theistic and is something that could fit in with any spiritual path or any spiritual belief system, or none. Certainly it can be done strictly in a secular way. But I think that's worth saying, because I think a lot of people do end up experiencing it as a somewhat spiritual experience if you have that orientation. So thinking about how it connects to your spiritual path is also useful and is worthy of exploration.
It combines very nicely with a lot of spiritual traditions, or none. Plays well with others.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alex, for this meaningful exploration of the theme of self-compassion. Listeners out there, we hope that you have found something useful and meaningful for yourself in some of what we've shared and discussed. And we will be back in our next episode with our next interview. So take care and be well.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.